Hello, and thank you for listening to THRIVECAST. My name is Dr. Tara Rowe from the University of North Florida and the director of the THRIVE program. THRIVE is a supplemental support program for UNF students with a diagnosis of Autism Spectrum Disorder, or ASD. I'm excited to kick off our very own podcast channel known as THRIVECAST. Each episode will feature current, past, and even future THRIVE staff and students as we navigate topics related to our program. We are excited to share our unique stories from our own perspectives as we know firsthand how powerful our stories truly can be.
Hi everyone, my name is Hope, and I'm a current staff member with THRIVE. This month's podcast is going to be focusing on the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, since it was passed 30 years ago this month in July. The ADA was created to minimize, and ideally end, discrimination based on someone's disability and requires employers and schools to provide accommodations when needed. The ADA has allowed for things like ramps to access public buildings and for service animals to be allowed into those buildings. Tara and I will talk about this more later on in the podcast, but first we're interviewing Henry, who is a THRIVE student and staff member. Hi Henry, can you start us off by introducing yourself?
All right, my name is Henry DuBose. I am a student at the University of North Florida. I graduated last year with my bachelor's degree in psychology, and I am currently doing a master's of education degree with a concentration in applied behavior analysis. I currently work for the THRIVE program at UNF, which provides services to individuals with high-functioning autism spectrum disorder who are applying for a degree at UNF. So I mentor students in the THRIVE program and help them achieve their goals, as well as work on academics and other support programs.
How long have you been involved with THRIVE?
As a student, I've been in THRIVE for about 4 years, but I've been working for the THRIVE program as a staff member for about 2 years now.
How familiar are you with the Americans with Disabilities Act? So, what do you generally know about it?
I'd say I'm fairly familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act. I've taken several courses regarding disabilities in college, including an introduction to disabilities and cooperation and consultation in special education. So since I'm currently pursuing a degree in special education and my job will require working with individuals with disabilities on a regular basis, it's important that I'm familiar with the ADA. So I'm able to provide accommodations to clients in the workplace and also as an individual with a disability. It's also important that I'm familiar with the ADA as well, and I know which regulations are in the ADA so I can receive appropriate accommodations to succeed in the workplace as well.
So you look at it from like all the angles possible.
Yeah, so we'll look at it personally. It's important that I'm familiar with the ADA so I can receive accommodations that I need, but it's also important that I know if I work with clients in the future who are trying to apply for a job, it's important that I know the what's in the ADA so I can help them to receive those accommodations that they might need, as well as in the community as a whole.
That makes sense. So what does the ADA mean to you? I guess in each of those facets.
Well, to me, the ADA is important in allowing increased opportunities for individuals with disabilities, as well as increased access to public facilities and transportation. So the ADA, it prevents discrimination against individuals based on their disabilities and requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities in the workplace. So this applies to the job application and hiring process, as well as during job training, and employers can't discharge employees based on their disability. So it's important that employers provide reasonable accommodations to individuals with employees, which allows them to perform their jobs. And the ADA also involves making public accommodations accessible to individuals with disabilities. For example, installing a ramp for individuals with mobility impairments who use a wheelchair, or providing service animals for individuals who need them. And individuals under the ADA have full access to goods and services provided by facilities. So basically, the ADA means that no individual should be denied access to public spaces based on their disabilities, and that also individuals with disabilities are able to access auxiliary aids in order to assist in communication with other individuals who don't have disabilities. So basically, for me, the ADA is important because it has allowed for increased access to opportunities, like I said, but it's also reduced unemployment for individuals with disabilities, which is important because it's given them an opportunity to demonstrate that they're capable of the same things that people without disabilities are. And it's giving them increased opportunities in the workplace. And the ADA as a whole has advanced civil rights in this country and given everyone equal access, which I think is really important.
Do you think there's anything missing from the ADA? I mean, that's kind of putting you on the spot because it's a huge policy, but
I mean, I think the ADA has received a number of updates over time. I think that's made it more inclusive. I don't think there's really anything missing in the ADA itself, but I think there are certain steps that could be taken in the future in order to make it more comprehensive. One area that I was thinking was maybe that disability activism could be focused more on improving accommodations for individuals who access digital technologies. So maybe with telecommunications, since a greater number of jobs are now taking place online, it may be important to focus more on allowing individuals with disabilities to communicate more effectively with their employers and other individuals. So providing maybe more focus on auxiliary aids for people with disabilities and people who are deaf or hard of hearing could access devices to help them maybe communicate more effectively in the workplace.
before we go into our next interview, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the THRIVE program. THRIVE stands for the Transition to Healthiness, Resourcefulness, Independence, Vocation, and Education, and was established back in 2012. Our mission focuses on supporting students within 3 main facets: social skills, independent living skills, and career development skills. Students work on building these skills by attending THRIVE events or meeting with a weekly mentor, like Henry or I. Karina, our next interviewee, is also a mentor. Karina, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Karina Sanchez, and I don't really know my year at UNF. I know that I'm somewhere between a junior and a senior. My major is business and management with a minor in marketing, and I've been involved with THRIVE since I've been here, so probably about last fall.
So about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We were wondering, what does the ADA mean to you as a student who has been in THRIVE and who works in THRIVE as a mentor?
I've never really heard of the ADA, to be really honest.
That's okay.
But I think that's because a lot of people don't put emphasis into it. But I do know that during classes as a student, if I have a disability or something that causes me to take a long time to take an exam or something, I do have the extra time, and I am allowed to have that extra time, and I'm allowed to have a private room.
So you're able to get accommodations through
Yes.
the ADA. That makes sense. Do you think it's been helpful in that way? Do you think there are any downsides to that?
Not really. I just think that more people should kind of know about it. Like me, I don't really know much about it, but that's because it's not really put out there. And if we put things out there, then more people will know about it.
So, in terms of my question of what do you think disability activism and policy should be focused on, and what are the next steps, it seems like education might be the main one.
I think for one is that we should kind of teach people to kind of understand that just because we're autistic or because we have a disability doesn't make us dumb. It doesn't make us stupid. If we can kind of teach people to not only embrace their disability, but other people who don't have a disability to kind of like join or like kind of understand people with disabilities, I think that we can make something great.
Not just educating the person with the disability, but educating those around them.
Yes.
Okay.
I also believe that the media does have a lot to do with it, especially the depictions of people with autism. Usually in the medias, you don't see like a person like me with autism. You see the low functioning or the ones that aren't able to mask their things,
Yeah.
and you don't really see much of the people with autism on TV that are like me.
I feel like, just to add on to that in another way, like there's such little representation of women on the spectrum, you know? Like when I think of autism in media, like I think of like the super smart academic guy. Like I feel like that's such a common stereotype, and it's always a guy.
Like the good doctor.
Yeah, or like, oh my god, I hate that, like the Big Bang Theory, all that sort of like smart academic guy who's like socially awkward. Like that's what you get when you, I don't know, consume the media.
Yes. It's a broad spectrum. Like my autism is different than probably Henry's autism, or probably all the people in Thrive's autism, because some things trigger me differently than they trigger them. So that's why I say it's a broad spectrum. Like I don't want to compare people's autism with my autism.
So it's not so much like more representation of autism in media that you'd like, it's more representation of the variety of experiences.
And the variety of the whole spectrum, not just one part of the spectrum.
I really enjoyed getting to sit down with both Henry and Karina to talk about the ADA from a college student's perspective. However, it seemed important to also discuss the ADA with more of an academic expert, which is why Tara is our next interviewee. Tara is one of the original Thrive founders and is the current director of the Thrive program. She also teaches courses at UNF and other universities, and her research interest focuses largely on self-determination and mentoring. Hi, Tara. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Dr. Tara Rowe, and I am the current director for the Thrive program here at the University of North Florida. I was one of the students that helped get the program started back in 2012, and am still here today.
Cool. Okay, so our first question is, how has the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, changed since it was first passed 30 years ago?
It's a heavy question, but I think what might help to understand, or even just to provide some context, when ADA was first passed, it was initially meant to extend as part of the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is a civil rights act. And the ADA was the civil rights portion that extended to individuals with disabilities to ensure access to places of public entities and buildings and government offices and things like that. And I think what I wanted to maybe clarify, ADA is why there are electronic doors on certain buildings, or why some bank machines have Braille on the keypads. So it's all that kind of stems back to the ADA and how the ADA was written and put into place.
It's kind of weird to like think about how like these are all things that are like normal for me. Like that's how it's always been for me. So it's kind of weird to reflect on what it was, I guess. So What role does ADA have in your current position and your current field?
Mm-hmm. So because of ADA and the role it has, because I work in an institution of higher education, so I work at a public university, that was one of the things that was established as a result of ADA, that all public universities have a designated ADA compliance office or person, or somebody somewhere is responsible for ensuring that ADA compliance is met. So for me, we have an ADA compliance office that handles all of the access to buildings, making sure that the physical spaces are in compliance with ADA as far as parking spaces and the exact distances from certain buildings. My office is actually housed in the Disability Resource Center, which is a subset of ADA, but we're actually student focused. So we provide ADA mandated accommodations for individuals with disabilities or our students with disabilities in the academic setting.
But there's a whole bunch of different branches throughout, or pieces throughout UNF.
As far as ADA compliance goes?
Yeah.
Yes, but when it comes to like a student requesting an accommodation, they would be directed to the Disability Resource Center, because that's where we're a resource center for students, versus the ADA compliance office is there. And if there was a request for like a faculty member maybe needing some assistance or different types of equipment in a classroom, they would be directed to the ADA office.
Got it. That's cool. And then our last question really is, what do you think disability activism and policy should focus on now in 2020? Like, what next steps do you think we should be taking?
So this is a heavy question. So I had to do a little bit of thinking in like, what exactly, what do I think about disability activism, and how, I mean, certainly when we look back 30 years ago to what this question would have asked and what those changes are now. And I think the biggest thing that stands out to me is how activism, especially disability activism, should focus on intersecting and crossing into different platforms of individual rights. And what I mean by that, a lot of times when we're talking about identities, we tend to marginalize or think of one identity as a representation of this one person, which it's just something that we're kind of conditioned into thinking when we grow up. However, so when we're talking about a person with a disability, for some, it's hard to also see this person with a disability as well as a person who may identify as LGBTQ, or a person who has a disability, as well as just whatever identity that person might have, and having more than one identity and what that looks like in different settings. So if I'm in a disability setting and I'm talking about disability rights, how then does these other things that I identify with play into this disability setting? And I think there's what hopefully we're going to see more of is a lot more crossover, because it's impossible to separate them and treat them individually, because we all have such unique experiences that it's almost like a disservice when we can only focus on one. I'm only going to focus on what are the rights of this student of mine who has a disability, without also considering those other identities the student has, because those really do reflect in all of those other identities. Until they're all valued and considered, like there shouldn't be one that's more important than another, because we're talking about like what somebody identifies as. So it can't be, well, I think that identifying as LGBTQ is a brave thing, but also identifying as somebody with a disability is kind of something you don't really want to talk about, because nobody's ever going to hire you, kind of thing. Like, until we can see those as those are things that make up a person and see those as equal things, that activism and that even just that understanding of disability identity isn't really going to shift or move in a forward motion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing I wanted to highlight, though, especially when we're talking about what next steps, like where do we go from here? A lot of times, until we see laws and policies passed and put into place from the top down, a lot of the same struggles that I'm seeing, or that we're still seeing, are going to continue for individuals with disabilities. And the biggest one that stands out to me is employment. I feel very strongly about employment. And because of ADA, we know now that an individual with a disability is not like, you can't discriminate on the basis of that person having a disability. We know that it's been now 30 years in the making. However, when we go to apply and interview for a job, when we have the conversation about disclosing, hey, I'm here for an interview, are your doors ADA compliant? And I asked that before the interview. Is that employer or is that person interviewing me going to see me as an equal, or are they going to see me as a liability because their doors aren't motorized?
Mm-hmm. It's like you're not disclosing, but you're also like bringing to light something that like kind of puts you on their radar.
Right.
Those are both difficult hurdles that we still have to overcome, I guess.
Well, and I think that, and the like how you would address that in any setting is by having these exact conversations, by just talking about it. Even if I don't fully understand it, I would like to know more. And I think if we have kind of an open mindset of, please tell me what your experiences have been personally, because this is what social media or what I'm seeing in secondary sources, this is all my knowledge, or this is all the experience I have. And it might not even be accurate until we have that like ongoing dialogue with individuals who have this identity.
Yeah. So listening, and then hopefully with the conversations, it'll bring about the actual change that we need.
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes, it's not even by anybody famous, and it was probably more of a meme than a quote, but it's still like is really powerful for me. And I know that living this kind of statement in my everyday life is how I can do my part as far as disability activism and policy goes. But a lot of times we'll be asked like, well, how do you treat someone with a disability, like to make sure that they feel comfortable and make sure they feel accepted and make sure they're welcome? And the answer is very simple. You treat them like everybody else. So until we kind of get over this, like, oh, I need to tread lightly, or I need to treat them differently, like that mindset is still what's continuing to separate everyone from their identities. But until we treat everybody just like everybody else, we're not really going to make that forward motion.
We still have a ways to go.
We do, but the good news is we've come so far, because that's the good thing. Like we could, when you stop to think about it, and especially, and I teach a class at the undergraduate level, disability law and policies, and the feedback from the students at the end of the class is always like, man, I had no idea how limiting everywhere still is for individuals with disabilities as far as access goes, and ensuring equal rights. And because all we're doing is we're pinpointing and really focusing on these areas that are, they still need to change, but it helps really to take a step back and look at how far we've actually come, because that's just as encouraging and like motivating to see, like, look at all we did in 30 years. Imagine what we could do in the next 30 years when we have these focused mindsets and have this knowledge.
That's optimistic, and it's like a hopeful kind of feeling. But
definitely.
Thank you, Tara, for
Absolutely.
answering our questions.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our latest podcast with THRIVECAST. If you would like more information, please check us out on Facebook at UNF Thrive Official, on Instagram at #UNF Thrive Official and at UNF_Thrive, or simply by email at thrive@unf.edu. Thank you for your support and for the Thrive program at UNF.